Hey guys, it's Dr. Ivy Brandon here, naturopathic doctor, and I'm excited to be having another live interview. So last time I interviewed Caprice Abowit of Birth Smarter, and now I am interviewing somebody very much connected to her in that world. I'm going to be talking to Deb Flashenberg at the Prenatal Yoga Center here in New York City. And I had actually known about both the Prenatal Yoga Center and Deb, both through Caprice, but also my friend Lily, who helps to run her podcast. And so I had known about the Prenatal Yoga Center for many years. And then when I got pregnant with my son, naturally I decided to take a couple classes there, which ended up actually taking, oh my gosh, maybe at least I don't know, 10, 20 classes. And then also like after I gave birth to my son, doing both like the postpartum class and also the like the baby and me or the mommy and me yoga classes. And I was really drawn to the center. Mostly it actually dispelled what I had thought about prenatal yoga from my experience of going to yoga classes, always seeing pregnant moms doing modifications. And I thought that's all it was, but it's so much more. And of course, we're going to get Deb is going to do a better job at explaining why yoga is so much more than that. So I'll just do a quick introduction. So Deb Flashenberg is the founder of and director of the Prenatal Yoga Center here in New York City, but they also do help with pregnant women all over the states and the world because they have a great online presence. Along with being a prenatal yoga teacher, she is also a labor support doula, Lamaze childbirth educator, postpartum corrective exercise specialist, spinning babies parent educator, and mother of two. Deb received her first vinyasa yoga certification with Shiva Ray in 2004, and then added to her education by completing the Om Yoga Advanced Yoga Teacher Training with Cindy Lee. And I was a big fan. That was where I started out when I came back to New York back in 2011. After the challenging birth of her first child, Deb became incredibly interested in pelvic health and has since earned the pelvic floor yoga certification with Leslie Howard. In 2022, Deb completed Dr. Sarah Duval's pregnancy postpartum corrective exercise specialist program and the Spinning Babies Parents Educator certification. She has also most recently completed the Body Ready Method certification. And as I mentioned before, so for the past 8 years, Deb has her own podcast, Yoga Birth Babies, where she speaks to experts in pregnancy, breastfeeding, and parenthood. So excited that you're going to be joining us live today.
Yeah, I like clearly learning as you read all those certifications.
Yes.
I'm a junkie for education and for learning. I feel like the more I learn, the more I can pass on to my students. And I just find it really exciting. In fact, it's funny, one of my friends is a PT. He's like, so when do you take the jump to do that? And I'm like, we're gonna hold off on that for now.
Okay, so we're going to kick off with some of the questions. And I forgot to mention in the beginning of this live that we will be opening up for question and answer after the initial interview. So if you're sticking around and you have like some burning questions, hopefully you'll stick around and be able to ask Deb at the end. And of course, you can always post questions in the chat of the live after the recording. So I first wanted to ask you, Deb, like, how did you come to prenatal yoga? I mean, I did just read your very extensive bio, but I mean, why
My
prenatal?
prenatal, it's really funny. It's kind of a very roundabout story. So I was a singer dancer for many years, and I had a choreographer that introduced me to yoga. And I'm like, oh, I like this yoga thing. And I started to like it more than dancing. And I soon started to do this style called Bikram. Now, I'm really going to date myself. I think you and I are not far off in the ages. I think I'm a little older, but this was like 1999, that maybe 98, And I then started to do Bikram yoga. And I did their certification. I found out during the certification it wasn't quite my thing. And I came back, but I was teaching it because I actually really liked the community and the fellow teachers. The community was great. But I mentioned to one of the teachers, I'm like, "Oh, I hate that I'm stuck to this monologue." Like, that's what Bikram is. It's like this 26 pose. You can't change it. You're not supposed to check in with the students. Like, you're supposed to stick to the script. And it felt really limiting. I mean, now
Mm.
you've taken my classes, like we check in, I make the class up based on what I'm hearing. So you can imagine how Bikram felt, that I was like, that was it. And so I was kind of lamenting about that. And they said, maybe you should look at a different style of yoga. I'm like, I think I should. So I talked to my mom. Now, my mom did marketing. And this was now about 2001. And she's like, well, why don't you look at prenatal yoga? People spend money on weddings and pregnancy and birth. They're
100%.
going 100%. And
100%.
so she said, when they're pregnant, they're going to take care of themselves and they're going to spend money to take care of themselves. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. And so I started to look for, now I was also like 27. So none of my friends were having kids. Kids were the last thing from my mind, but I started to look for a program, and the only one I found at the time was out in Seattle. So I schlepped out to Seattle to do this training. So that's how I initially just got introduced to prenatal yoga.
What
But
studio was that by? Sorry, I don't
oh
want to.
yeah,
I'm just
oh
curious. I used to live in Seattle.
the Seattle Holistic Center with Colette Crawford. It was
Okay.
gorgeous. It was absolutely beautiful time of year I went out. It was apparently it was like the small window of great learners
Oh,
in Seattle.
September it must have been.
It was like October, September. Yeah.
Yeah, next only time to go to Seattle.
I was there. I'm like, this is amazing. But it's funny because so then I kind of just hung my shingle and started to teach prenatal. But I had a big turning point that made Prenatal Yoga Center what it is. So it's really kind of illegal what this student did. So I had a student doing their fellowship at one of the teaching hospitals. And so I had already opened PYC, and she's like, do you want to see some births? And I said, I do, because I hadn't seen anything. And so she took me
But
to
you
the
had not
hospital.
had any kids at this
No,
point.
I was at this point, I was now about 28. I'd opened the studio at 28. I had not had kids. I didn't have my first until 37. And so she put me in scrubs and she told everyone I was a med student. And so I know it's kind of now in hindsight, I'm like, that was a little fuzzy on ethics. But when I saw hospital births, like really typical hospital births, I was a little mortified. And there was just one birth in particular that was really challenging. And the parents were just shell shocked. They didn't feel like they were treated well. The baby was left in the warmer, and I was just there. And when I left that day, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm doing my students a disservice because I'm not teaching them about the world of birth. I
Mhm.
was doing kind of what you referred to. I was just modifying yoga poses safely, but just modifying poses. And so then I realized I need to really bring education into the program so that each class they're getting a little more education and preparation mentally and physically. So I left that hospital day and I enrolled to become a doula. And then that's where like my thirst for knowledge. I'm like, okay, then I'm gonna be a Lamaze teacher. And then I'm gonna go to this place called the farm and do a midwifery program. Like I just wanted to learn because I found it exciting. But the more I learned, the more I could share with my students. So that's how PYC really evolved into the support of community education and yoga. It's not just, as you were saying, like take a class, let's modify. It's how do we prepare the mind and body? How can we educate the students beyond just a childbirth ed class? Now, clearly, I'm a Lamaze teacher. I love childbirth ed. But if we can give little bite-sized childbirth pieces in each class, that might sink in even more than sitting down for a class. Because when you sit down for a class, you're like, give it all to me. But if you're doing it in a yoga class, you embody it in a different way. So that was a long answer to your question, but that's how I got into prenatal yoga.
Yeah, but again, I had no idea about your backstory, and I think again, like one of the benefits specifically of the Prenatal Yoga Center is that you're doing it on a weekly basis, maybe even a couple times a week. Versus, I also did took childbirth education class, And there's something about like that repetition that's really going to
Mhm.
be preparing the body and the mindset more than again just like a one-off
Yeah. And that
class.
and that was really important to me because I think that's how we learn when we really feel it within our body. And like you said, the repetition.
And again, I have not been to any other prenatal classes, and I actually slept all the way from Brooklyn. It was not easy for me to get to, uh, but it just was so worth it. After my
Oh, I'm
first
so
class, I was like,
glad.
"This is exactly what I need," and it really definitely supported my own birth journey. So maybe now let's go into some of the specific ways prenatal yoga can prepare the body and mind for labor and birth. Again, when specifically when we're talking about prenatal yoga in the context of our interview, we're really talking about the prenatal yoga center style of yoga. We're
Yeah,
not talking about modifications
right.
or restorative yoga. This is like prep work.
Yeah, so we just actually renamed what we teach. We're calling it the PYC method now. It's so funny. So many times people we call it our methodology, and then someone said, "Why don't you just shorten it?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." So we're now calling it the PYC methods that we teach at Prenatal Yoga Center, and our focus, as I mentioned, is really about the three prongs: the education, the asana, and the community. But what we really focus on in preparing for birth, two main things. It's the mindset and kind of go back to what we're saying, the repetition. So I actually just did a reel on this I'm going to release soon. It's about the practice and the repetition. So you can practice, we'll introduce the idea of relaxation and coping skills in the beginning of class, maybe in our restorative or in our conversation in the beginning, a little Dharma talk. But then we're going to put it into practice because one thing that a lot of us do is like maybe read books, take notes, and plan, like, oh, yeah, I'm going to use mantras, I'm going to use movement, I've got this. And you're like, okay, I've got my list of coping skills. But unless you actually practice them when you might be challenged or uncomfortable, they're not going to be as accessible. And you might be surprised what you gravitate towards. So, like in yesterday's class, I was focusing a lot on relaxing the jaw because a lot of folks
Mm.
were tight. We tense up. And it was interesting. I have this one pose, I don't know if you remember it, called screaming toe. It's like when we're sitting back on the heels, you're stretching out your feet. I personally hate it, but it's really uncomfortable. And so I asked the students, notice where your tension is. And a lot of them said their neck and shoulders and jaw. So I said, great. Now that you know that, now we're going to put into practice reminding yourself in your head, soften my jaw, soften my neck, soften my shoulders. So it's taking the coping skill and putting it into practice that I think gets the mindset. And then we're also talking about sometimes you're not able to do big movements. Like I'm all about like relaxing and moving, but what if you're getting an epidural? You're certainly not like moving around. If you're getting a C-section, you're not moving around. So the coping skills can be about the mind and relaxing the body. And I think, again, the repetition and different coping skills. So like yesterday was focusing on the jaw. Other times it's mantras. Other times it's counting your breath. Other times it's your focal point. Is it internal, external? So we keep looking through class at all these different coping skills and putting it to practice. But then there's the physical side of preparing. This is where I get a little geeky, and I should have brought my pelvis up um, because I love the biomechanics of pregnancy and birth. I'm just an anatomy geek, which is funny because I have a degree in musical theater and I haven't taken a science class since high school. But the biomechanics is when the soft tissue, the fascia, the ligaments, the uterus, the muscles, the bony pelvis are balanced and in alignment, that can help babies journey through the pelvis because they go in and they take turns to come out. They don't just shoot out like a gumball, which would be nice.
Yeah.
So, and the pelvis needs to accommodate that. When the baby's coming into the pelvis, we need to open the inlet. When baby's in the mid pelvis, we need to open and move these things called the ischial spines and let the pelvic floor be responsive. When baby's coming out, we need to let the tailbone swing back and widen the sit bone. So for the pelvis to move functionally, the muscles and soft tissue need to be able to respond and help with that. If we're too tight, the bones don't move. Or if
Mm.
the pelvic floor is too tight, that can affect how baby is progressing or not. And so we start to use the asana to think, how can we create this internal balance? How can we make sure that the pelvic floor is responsive, springy, so as the baby's head meets it, the chin tucks and it can rotate through? How can we make sure that the bones, the sacrum, can be responsive? So we look at the poses that we include to make sure we're creating a lot of balance. So we actually do a lot of strengthening poses. I think a lot of people are surprised.
Mhm.
They think that it's just like stretching, which it is. It's delicious stretches, but we do a lot of like hamstring and glutes, a lot of posterior chain, a lot of breathing, a lot of diaphragmatic breathing to try to find that internal balance so that baby's flow can and be uninhibited and baby doesn't get stuck. Often when I hear about long births, and I had one myself, my first birth was very long and very challenging, which created curiosity of like, well, what was going on that it was like that. So I discovered a little information. But when births tend to be long, usually there's some obstruction. Maybe the psoas is tight. Maybe the pelvic floor isn't releasing. I remember doing a birth years ago as a doula, and in hindsight, I'm like, oh, now I understand. But the client was a marathon runner. So her psoas and her pelvic floor were super tight. Now she had endurance, she had coping skills, like she could handle what was going on, but everything was really tight. And even though she wanted an
Mm.
unmedicated birth, and we got to like hour 30, and she still was, halfway through dilation and effacement and station, she was just beat. And the doctor actually said, I think she needs an epidural. And I brought this up to my client, and she's like, I don't know. And then, like, a couple hours later, she's like, okay. And when she took I mean, again, this is like hour like 33. When she took the epidural, that allowed these muscles that were so tight to relax, and baby could continue to descend and be birthed vaginally. So we're trying to correct some of those issues before birth. So if the pelvic floor is really tight, how can we find a little more suppleness and balance?
Mm.
If the psoas is really tight, how can we find that balance so that baby can descend through? So if we can get the work done before, we're hoping less interventions during labor. So that's how we can approach mentally and physically preparing for birth.
No, I'm gonna ask. So, and I'm hoping that, and if again, like if you don't know the answer to this, and you can
Yeah.
like sort of feel like I can't answer this. Uh, so I understand the concept of preparing the muscles ahead of time as far as like making sure that they're strong, like correctively strong, but also at the same time the that relaxation and the flexibility to enable the baby to pass through just like a little bit easier. Uh, but see, I'm trying to see how can I tie. So because I know that also at the beginning when we were talking about prenatal yoga, you mentioned about this idea of the jaw tightening. So this
Oh,
might be like a
yeah.
two-part question.
Okay.
So is there a relationship, with the dog? When is there sort of like, because I think I had heard about this, that like there's like
Oh,
this,
the jaw on the pelvic floor.
yeah, is that,
Yeah, I call it open throat, open vagina.
yeah.
I gotta get t-shirts to do that. So everyone walking around the Upper West Side can say open throat, open vagina. There is actually a neuromuscular connection between tension. So if you even just like clench your jaw, you can feel the pelvic floor engage. I found that connection pretty organically. I didn't study it at first, and then I'm like, oh, there's something to it. I used to be a singer. Now I'm just singing around my house, but I used to be an actual professional singer. And I remember doing a song with my voice teacher. And now I had a really wide range. And so I remember so clearly this day, she would turn the page, the big money notes at the end, and I was getting in my head. I was like, ah, like, and then I was really tight, and the note did not come out well. So she told me, circle your hips like a hula hoop. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. And then as I did that, the note just came out on the breath and spiraling. I'm like, oh, there's something to this because I loosened up and then it just flew out. Now, I was also an active doula at that time. So I was listening to my clients, and when they were in labor and they're going,
Mm.
I was like, oh, if they're, and you could see the tension. I'm like, what's happening in the pelvic floor? And so as then we got to the pushing stage and they're like, and I'm like, go into what called it the dumb face, relax your jaw and just let everything. And it actually seemed to help with how birth was moving through. And so that's when I'm like, oh, I think there's a connection. So I first experienced it just organically, and then I started to look into it. And there is a neuromuscular connection. So one of the things in class we do focus on is finding that relaxation so that the pelvic floor, and again, if we practice it over and over in class, and if the partner is aware, or the birth partner or doula is looking at the person in labor and be like, oh, you're clenching, in a nice way, be like, relax your jaw, that can help the pelvic floor relax. So I'm a big fan of keeping all this soft.
Yeah, and when you first started with that, I was like, I wonder if she's going to go there. And then my other question, kind of similarly, because yes, obviously there's a lot of preparation we can do to get into mindset and everything going into birth, and then birth actually really happens, and it's like a things can really change. And so, with somebody who specifically maybe they have done like a lot of like exercises, to open up the pelvic floor and relaxation. What so we talked already about the jaw as a potential sign of pelvic floor
Ooh,
tightening.
yeah, I want to go
Uh,
into that. I love that stuff.
I guess besides that, like what are either I guess like one like other potential signs, and then maybe some other things in place that somebody could access. Specifically, I'm thinking more from like a standpoint like a stress, anxiety inducing of the tightening of the pelvic floor. And maybe
Yes.
that's something also working with a doula, I would assume also would help.
Yeah, so stress does affect the pelvic floor. We tend to clench more. So some of the indicators, just because a lot of people are like, I don't know what my pelvic floor is. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation. I'll also say I always outsource if someone is really confused. I'm like, go to pelvic floor PT
Yes.
because they're going to get in there in a way that I don't. But I can give some indicators that someone might be like, oh, I do have a tight pelvic floor, or like, oh, I need to work this, because some of the things that is still being told as someone's pregnant, they're like, oh, just do 100 Kegels a day. And that that's not it's not a one size fits all thing, because especially I feel like in New York, and this might be a little overgeneralization, where we might feel a little more anxiety and just
Oh, yeah.
type A personality. I say that as myself. Um, and jaw clenching and butt clenching can be indicators of a tight pelvic floor. So if they're told just do Kegels, 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 and they already are starting from that tight place, then they can actually shorten the muscles and keep them in a tight place. And then they might have leakage because the pelvic floor is not responsive. And then there's leakage if there's pressure and the pelvic floor is not responding. And they're like, oh, I'm leaking. I should do more. And then they can actually make things worse. So when we do pelvic floor work in class, I like to give some broad strokes, things like, well, anyone 36 plus weeks, I'm thinking like for you guys, just work on releasing your pelvic floor. But then other indicators like tailbone pain, constipation, it hurts when you poop,
Hmm.
jaw clenching, butt clenching, pain with vaginal penetration. A lot of those can indicate that the muscles are already in a short state. And then we want to work on how to relax. But then we're also working on, instead of letting the pelvic floor overwork, let some of the other supporting muscles. They're actually, the funny thing is, the glutes are supposed to be the main supporters, but if they're not firing up and they're not working, then the pelvic floor steps in. And it's like, okay, friends, if you're not going to do your job, I guess I have to do it. And then it gets even tighter.
Is that
So
is that from a birth perspective or just from like a postural perspective?
that could be, it could be postural, it could be just people don't fire up with their glutes a lot. I think, if you're just doing cardio, maybe you're not getting the glutes involved that much. So it could be definitely postural. People kind of sitting and tucking under, people sitting into one, standing into one hip, or just their glutes are weak. A lot of people have really weak glutes. And when the glutes are weak, then there can be more pelvic instability and spinal instability, and then the pelvic floor steps in. And a lot of people have tight pelvic floors and don't even realize it. And
Mhm.
they're treating themselves like, oh, again, I'm leaking, I better do Kegels. And that could be making the problem worse. I don't know if I answered your
Yeah,
question
I
all the
think
way.
that's also yeah, it's very helpful. But the other thing was, though, I was just kind of even thinking more
Yeah.
more in the moment of birth, in, again, like a lot. I actually I had a very easy. I had a mostly easy birth, but I'm just thinking about, like, a lot can happen, as far as a lot can change, and mindset, and when we actually start experiencing the physiological feelings that one might experience in birth, and the anticipation, and that effect on the nervous system, then causing tightness
Mhm.
in as a response to that. And I guess there's like two things I was thinking about. Like, one, obviously, worrying about, oh my gosh, is my pelvic floor tight now? That's not going to be helping the
Right.
situation. So what would you say is a good way to, like, release in those moments? Because, like,
Oh, okay.
recognizing and releasing, maybe that, hopefully
Yeah,
that makes
so let's address if the concern is the pelvic floor tight? Hopefully, we've been doing enough work before, kind of like that whole idea I said
right.
earlier. Can we get things more balanced ahead? So less intervention. So hopefully, we've been working on finding a balanced pelvic floor. And by balanced, I mean springy. You don't like a trampoline, it's responsive. You
Mm.
want it to be able to support and stretch. So hopefully, we've been doing our work there so that the person in labor is not like, oh my God, I hope my pelvic floor is not too tight. Hopefully, we've relieved that anxiety. But if we didn't, then diaphragmatic breathing could be really helpful.
Mm.
So if someone, and then just recognizing where they're tense, so if they're tense in their neck and shoulders, someone on the birth team noting that's the pattern and reminding them and really finding that diaphragmatic breathing as best they can. And then finding ways during birth to stay loose. So if someone's clenching their whole body or their butt during labor, you can maybe have a care, not, definitely not the care provider, sorry, someone on the care team, like the doula or the partner taking a leg, and it's called shaking the apples. Like, so they're releasing the thighs, or taking a scarf and releasing the butt, or using your hands and releasing the butt. So if you're like literally shaking the muscles, that is going to help them relax. So you could manually do that. There's a technique in spinning babies called the side lying release that helps release the pelvic floor. So during labor, you can physically help release as well as get into that deep breathing. Because when we're in that parasympathetic nervous system,
Mhm.
we know that the nervous system is going to get quieter and more relaxed as best as possible. And that can help the pelvic floor relax. And then again, it's funny that people always are surprised when I talk about the epidural. But if you're chronically tight and your anxiety is like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Sometimes medication that helps the muscles that are chronically tight relax, it's a tool. It's a tool like
Right.
anything else.
Which, one of the other things I really appreciated about the Prenatal Yoga Center, and similarly with, like, Birth Smarter, is like openness to all types of birth, and
Yeah.
interventions depending on what is going on with the birthing process.
Yeah, I really hope that people see that we don't have an agenda for how people birth. I guess my agenda is people feel confident and supported. I guess that's my agenda. But I'm not attached to you need to have an unmedicated home birth. You should never have like. I want people. We're taught. We really try to support autonomy and making choices for yourself. And that means that we will give information as best we can, like evidence-based information for people to make the choice that's right for them and their family.
Yeah. And the other, I think, aspect too of that is the community that your center really has built, and maybe talk a little bit about how that helps.
Oh
And
gosh, I think actually I think I mean you've been a student there. But
yes.
from what I can see, and my intention was always for it to be community based. So years ago, as you mentioned in my bio, I went to Om Yoga, and I miss it. It's gone.
Yes, I do too. That's my very special place. It was very,
It
you
was
know,
really special, especially I went to the one that was on 14th. Was it 14th? Like, it was
it's off on
really
Broadway. I was like Broadway between
there's
12th.
2.
Oh wow.
There was the original that was, I think, on 14th, like 2 floors up. It was pretty gritty. And then they opened, like, their big one off Broadway,
Yeah,
near the
that's where I got
Strand.
started.
Okay, so before there was like the gritty one, and then they had like the super nice one. Now the super nice one is where I went to more. But what I loved is they had like a little couch area off near, and if you remember, like they had the sign and desk, and they had like little couch area, and people would hang out there. And I thought, I love that because after class you could hang out, and then I was a teacher there too, and we could hang out in the like little staff room. And I really wanted a place that was so different from Bikram, where like you went in, you went out. I wanted a place that people hung out. They had workshops, they had classes, like they had community nights at home, like they had potlucks. Like I really wanted it to be community based. And so I loved that the teachers always did Dharma talks in the beginning, so that, I kind of adopted that, but I also adopted circle time, that which they didn't do at home. But I wanted the students, and we still do. We've been in business now for 23 years. Every class, even our online classes, you're going to say your name, how far along you are, your issues, your aches, your pains, requests. And what's beautiful is that someone could be like, I like this didn't even happen in class yesterday. Someone just expressed how overwhelmed they were, and other people chimed in. I mean, I had to hold the space so it just didn't become, you know, a big therapy session, but it's an opportunity for people to share and be recognized, and someone else in the community to also offer support, or like, yeah, I'm going through it too, maybe let's go out for coffee after. So community has always been part of it, and by showing up week after week, one, two, three classes a week, and seeing the same people and introducing your name, because I know I've been in classes with people where I'm like, I've been in class with you for 3 years, but I don't know your name, but I know a little bit about you. We're already breaking that barrier of how do I introduce myself to this person? I should already know their name. We've been together, for years. So everyone gets to know each other that way. And it's been beautiful watching people after class go out for coffee. Our postnatal folks, 2, 3 will come in with their babies from just taking a walk and take class. It really is so joyful to watch how people connect. And I think that pregnancy can feel overwhelming. It's amazing that in a city like New York, where it's so big and so many people, you could still feel really isolated, especially if your friends aren't going through pregnancy with you, or you move to New York for some reason, you don't have family around, and you feel just isolated in this huge transition. I wanted a place where people could go in those moments, especially postpartum, where maybe like yesterday, one student, she's like, my goal was to get out of the house and just talk to someone else than my baby.
Mhm.
And she's like, and I did it. She goes, I got on the subway with my baby. I got here. And I'm like, that's amazing. So, I think community is so important because it can also support PMADS, perinatal mood anxiety disorder. If you're feeling really isolated, that can just worsen that. So, yeah, it's one of our main staples.
Exactly, and that was, my experience specifically because I ended up having the C-section, so that took a little bit longer before I could get back to the prenatal yoga center, and I made a point that I think it was like, gosh, I don't even know your schedule anymore. It was either, but whatever the baby and me, and then the post. I made a point to like build that into my schedule. I think it was every like either Tuesday
Tuesday and Wednesday, yeah.
or Wednesday. So I like again, I live in Brooklyn, so it was like not super easy, but we would get on the subway. I go to the prenatal yoga center, meet up with a friend after, and I think that really supported my own postpartum
Oh, I'm
recovery.
so glad. I'm so, so glad.
And the other thing I wanted to, because I'll have you say it because I don't want to butcher it. Something that I really appreciated from your class was there's a mantra that is often said in your class. And the other thing that is nice is that you did say dharma when we were talking about om yoga, but I felt with prenatal yoga there's no like leaning to like any kind of like religious conflict.
Sure.
We'll just say
Yeah.
that. So one of the things that I really appreciate is that the mantra that is often said in your class, again, that it has no conflict of any kind, but I found it was really helpful with my own birth experience.
I have a few that we use. One is I trust my body, I
Yeah.
trust my baby, I trust the process. I use that a lot. That actually came up also in yesterday's class when the student was saying how overwhelmed she felt. Sometimes I use the mantra let go just as an invitation to like, what don't I need to hold on to? Sometimes we'll use the mantra, this too shall pass.
Mm.
And then another one that I share often is the breath is the pathway through the contraction or through this moment. And that is one that my own midwife gave me during my epically long first labor. Um, because I really attached to that. And I'm like, okay, my breath is my pathway because I don't have anything else at this moment other than my breath. But yeah, I trust my body. I trust my baby. I trust the process. I think is so important because there's often anxiety and like, how do I trust the process? Sometimes it's just, you just got to blindly trust because at that moment, what else can you do other than trust?
Mhm. And I actually still use that first mantra even today, not because I'm pregnant, but with my son, who's a very lively 2.5-year-old, and like trusting him and trusting our developing process. I did want to go back to the last mantra, and I just something else that's very fascinating with your class, and it really ties into that breath work, is your, I don't know if it's called like contraction
Oh, my
preparation.
mock contraction. Oh, yeah. Okay. So that came about because I personally hate wall squats. Because I wanted to find a physical position that you can safely maintain that's going to be easy on your joints, but challenging. And it's funny because I have some students, they're like, I could stand a wall squat for days, but if you ask me to stretch my hamstrings, I'm going to cry. And I'm like, okay, that's not my experience, but I totally respect that's yours. So the mock contraction, you lean against the wall and you just sit down like you're sitting into a chair. So as 90 degrees you can. And then I do a block between the thighs to keep the knees and feet even, but also when you get the block between your adductors, you have a little strength. And so I actually time it. Like I literally have a clock in front of me and we do it for 60 seconds because your average contraction is 60 seconds. And so I remind the students that it doesn't matter that in your birth, you might be like epidural all the way. You're not going to have an epidural on your first big contraction. You might be at home. You might be in the waiting room. You might be waiting for the anesthesiologist, whatever it is, you're going to have to get through some discomfort. And if you're having maybe a planned C section, you're going to have to get through some of the anxiety of the prep work while they get you set up. And sometimes you're alone in that while your partner's getting their little Oompa Loompa suit on. And so that's where you're also finding that internal grounding. So the mock contraction is a 60-second wall squat where we specifically work on coping skills all through class until we get to, I call it our peak pose. And then we really just explore, how am I getting through 60 uncomfortable seconds? That's where we really
Mm.
tie in the physical and the mental preparation. Again, we can think about all the great ways you're going to relax, but can we then actually apply it to real challenge? So yeah. Oh, I'm glad you asked about that. It's one of my favorites.
Yes. And it is true. I mean, even yeah, with a because my birth ended up being a planned C-section for various reasons, and the epidural can be very uncomfortable. That whole process is very, and yeah, you are completely alone. So having these techniques in place, even if you're not having a vaginal birth, which again, one of the things that I really appreciate about your class and your podcast is that no birth is superior
Right.
than, and it's not a failure. The birth is the birth.
Yes.
So as we wrap things up, what are some other additional takeaways that you would like our viewers, and then we will transition to a Q&A for those that want to stick around, but I just wanted to ask you, Deb, like what else do you find would be helpful?
Oh, good question. Obviously, I'm going to say prenatal yoga. I really think practicing the techniques is really important. I think open communication is really important. So, talking to your partner, I think, and whether it be a romantic partner or just your birth partner, having them on board and understanding your birth preferences. One important thing when I was an active doula, I talked to couples about is notice your dynamic is going to change. So, like, I'm going to use my example for like me and my husband. I'm like the doer, I'm the planner, but during labor, yeah, you get that. But during labor, that's not the role. I can't be I think I've tried a few times, they're like, "Just you just labor." Like, my role was not being able to be that way, and honestly, there was sometimes I was really s snippy. I kinda snapped a couple times at everyone, but just sharing that it's not don't take it personally, and so with the partners, knowing that the dynamic will change, and should the person in labor have a response, it's not like not taking it personally. So I think having that conversation of communication. I also think communicating clearly with your birth team, whether it be a doula, definitely the care provider. Make sure you're on the same page with the care provider. Even talking ahead of time about pushing positions. Like maybe in class, you're learning, like, oh, I may actually not want to be on my back. Maybe I want to be on my side. And you can do that with an epidural. Maybe I want to be on all fours. Communication with your care provider ahead of time so you're not having an argument, which I've seen back when I was a doula. I'd seen people try to negotiate during labor, even also how you push. Maybe someone wants to try to push with their breath and their care provider's like, hold your breath. So I think aligning with communication ahead of time we talked about the nervous system. If you're in strife with your partner or the doula or the birth team, that's going to raise anxiety and that is not going to help birth flow. Birth flow needs the parasympathetic first, nervous system, the oxytocin flowing. And if you're in your fight or flight and feel defensive and overwhelmed and scared, that can actually slow labor down. So I'm going to say practice prenatal yoga, balance your pelvic floor, prenatal yoga, and PTs, and communication. I think those are the main things.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation, Deb. So
Thank
again,
you.
this is Deb Flashenberg of the Prenatal Yoga Center. In a couple weeks, so November 6th, I'm going to have Tanya Wills, who
Oh,
is
yes,
at
yeah.
home. Do you know her?
I do. We went to school together. She's been
Oh,
on my podcast. We went to Boston Conservatory together, and she's been on my podcast like two or three times. Tanya is the best.
yes, yes. That's it's such a small world. It's really such a small world. So we're going to be talking all about home birth. I think it's going to be pretty fascinating, and also big news. So in I think probably in a few weeks we'll start making the official announcement. But my e-course, which is going to be all about getting pregnant in your 40s, is going to be launching. So definitely looking out for announcements about that. But that should be out in a few weeks. I'm looking forward to it. Uh, Thank you so much, Deb. And then anybody who wants to, we will be transitioning to Q&A shortly. But if you need to check off, that's perfectly fine. And of course, we are recording this live, and you can always come back and watch it again. Again, this is Dr. Ivy Brannon of Simplicity Health Associates, naturopathic doctor here in New York City.